organization called Old Mutual. Most of us know Old Mutual here. And we've put out a bold public ambition as our victory condition, which is to become our customers' first choice to sustain, to grow, to protect their prosperity. And I have the privilege of leading an ecosystem that day after day, it is our job to think about how do we transform skills at Old Mutual. So these are the skills of our leaders, but also skills of all of our employees. We do have presence in various markets across the continent, and it is a daunting task to think about what are those skills that we need to build. And today, just allow me to go through a journey where we talk about what are some of the important aspects we need to be considering around this topic of the future of leadership skills. I chose this quote from William Shakespeare, and it says, "Some are born great, others strive for greatness or achieve greatness, and yet others have greatness thrust upon them." And you will see the themes that I'll be sharing today in my talk really talk to the fact that, as we've had previous speakers talking about the fact that all of us are born with unique strengths. There may be character strengths, there may be other strengths that preposition us to be great at certain things. So how might we as leaders, and all of us, and I think the point has already been made around the fact that leaders, it's not about a role. It's not about the role that you occupy. If there is a goal to be accomplished and you are accomplishing that goal, and you are accomplishing that goal through others and with others, then you are a leader. So ideally, this quote then says, we all have the privilege to have these inherent gifts. All of us have the opportunity to build the skills that we need to build. And as we combine these two, we become luckier. You know what they say, that opportunity favors the prepared? It's kind of the point I'm trying to make with this quote. So whichever way you got here, the reality is you are a leader, and how do we take it from here? I thought also it's important for us to talk about the evolution of leadership. How has leadership evolved? What are some of the models that we understand to shape this topic of leadership? I mean, if you look at some of the older models around the great men theories, they're focusing on the leader themselves. And there have been amazing things that have happened throughout the ages. But I think what's incredibly inspiring and incredibly important is you see as you go to the 2000s where we are now, there's this focus on the job to be done and not on the leader themselves. And the leader recognizing that their role is there to create space and to make the ecosystem work, right? So we talk about servant leadership, we talk about inclusive leadership, we talk about this idea of contemporary leadership. The point we're making is that, and I think one of the previous speakers also spoke about it, the point we're making is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to defining leadership. Again, if I borrow this definition from a Harvard Business Review article, they're talking about leadership as the accomplishment of a goal through the direction of human assistance. And I think the next points are quite pertinent for me. The man who successfully marshals his human collaborators to achieve a particular end is a leader. I think the previous speaker also spoke about Brené Brown's definition. It's not about your role, it's not about where you sit, but it's about achieving the job to be done. And a great leader is one who does this day after day. And an even greater leader is one who can do this in a variety of contexts. Now, a number of the speakers that have spoken here spoke about this idea of this hyper-turbulent world that we find ourselves in. And I thought, as we're talking about skills, one of the skills I think is quite important is this idea to look for mental models and frameworks that can help us to explain and describe what is happening. This powerful Sandton framework helps us to understand the different contexts that we may find ourselves. And I think coupled with the journey of the evolution of leadership, you can actually start seeing how certain approaches to leadership start becoming irrelevant and others start becoming important. So for the past, I would say 100 years and a bit, the work to be done and the context was quite clear, right? And you could operate in a best practice scenario. And I think as we went on, even about 5 years ago, I would say, we're talking about the VUCA world. But the reality is we're actually operating in a context that was just complicated, where good practice could still work. So the leader could be the hero, the leader could be an expert, the leader could know the answers, and they would be the person that everyone went to for answers. But hang on, what happened 5 years ago? What happened is that we saw the complex and the chaotic coming together. And as those scenarios start playing out, the reality is no one has the answers. So if no one has the answers, what skills do we then need to have as leaders? Firstly, I think the biggest one is humility. Because if I've led for the past 15 years in my career as the hero, where everyone is coming to me for answers, and now I have to admit that I don't know, it becomes a very difficult thing to do, because it's both a mindset, but it's actually about my inner values as a human being. So we talk about this idea that this hero leadership approach that we've created over the years is actually quite disempowering, because we disempowered our teams not because we intended to, but because that's how leadership was done and it felt great. They come to you, they ask you, you give them the answer, they go away and they do it. But then you're disempowering everyone. And what I want to propose here today, ladies and gentlemen, is this idea of becoming a galvanizer, a leader who's empowering, a leader who recognizes that, yes, I'm a leader, but I'm also leading other leaders, right? It requires us to be open. It requires us to respect each other's ideas. It requires us to collaborate with others. I think one of the previous panels spoke about this idea of the framework that has come up. It's a movement actually over the past about 5 years or so, and it's called the Inner Development Goals Framework. I think all of us are familiar with the SDGs, and we talk about them, the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them, and in all of our annual reports, we talk about all the wonderful things that we're doing. And I think someone mentioned earlier on that we're not making as much progress as we need to make. And I think the realization with the creation of this framework is this notion and this idea that says, for us to actually make progress with the SDGs, we now need an IDG framework. And it's talking about, at a micro level, at a leader level, what are some of the skills leaders need to build? And I think some of the previous speakers expanded on them. But I just want to talk about, a few of them. So if we think about this idea of self and self-awareness, think about what we've heard the stats: most CEOs fail in the first 3 years of their tenure. It's not because they can't do the task. They've been hired because they've proven that they can do the task. But it's this idea that the self-awareness is maybe not where it's supposed to be. The idea of relating with others and the social intelligence and creating the social cohesion that's required in the context is really not there. The leaders are failing to understand the cultural nuances of the space that they're finding themselves. And so, ladies and gentlemen, just like this framework has been defined to help leaders achieve the SDGs, I think the question I throw back at you, and at myself actually, as a practitioner in this field, is to say, when we look at our strategies and what our organizations are trying to achieve, what is that framework of leadership skills that our leaders need to embody and start practicing and building to enable us to achieve those lofty ambitions that we want to achieve? And I just thought I would propose an idea. It's not my idea, it's not a new idea. We talk about the 70-20-10 principle in learning. And essentially, it's a simple idea that says 70% of your learning or of your skills building happens while you're actually doing the work, and 20% happens from others. And then the 10% happens when we go on courses, when we come to conferences like this. I think it's part of the 20 and the 10. But this idea that you go for a course, you do formal development is the 10%. But what is the 20%? And I think it's the most underutilized resource that we have as leaders to actually leverage to help us build our skills. We spoke about this idea of hyperturbulence, right? What we're finding and what we're feeling. I don't know, I have friends in the industry and I have friends in our organization. And what we're experiencing and we're feeling is that this hyperturbulence is resulting in goalposts shifting all the time. So suddenly, where we're used to doing great work, our work gets challenged all the time because by the time you deliver the piece of work, the goalpost has shifted. So what are the skills we need to have? I remember once I attended a conference and it was a stand-up comedian, and they taught us to paint, and we painted these beautiful portraits, and then when we were done, we made sure this was the best, right? When we were done, he said, destroy it. And I saw how difficult it was for all of us to destroy these paintings. And I think leaders, as I stand before you, one of the skills I've had to learn, particularly this year, is this idea of being able to destroy something I've put heart and soul into. And the human library helps us because the human library are the people we're talking to. It's in the conversations we are having. We can make it a bit more formal by obtaining coaches, and I recommend that, especially now, we all need as leaders to have a coach, to have a mentor, and so many people, put themselves out so freely and generously to do the work of coaching and mentoring, because I think that is one of the key tools we can leverage. And it's not just about, these formal setups that we create, right? It's also about in the moment with all the conversations we are having. How do I look at the next person? Because if I truly believe that this person is a leader by themselves, I'm looking at a human library. What are the things I can learn from that particular individual? So again, we're talking about this idea of fluidity of skills. The skills are fluid. We can't put a holistic list that we can now say, if I master these, I have now gotten it. The future is emergent. It's not static, right? But there are certain timeless skills and tools we can start utilizing. How do I practice the art of self-reflection? How do I continuously proactively seek feedback? And I know we talk about it, but actually asking for feedback and receiving the feedback you don't want to hear is also a skill and an art on its own. So we talk about this idea of being open, and we say, receive the feedback. But when the actual feedback comes, would you really want to hear it? And I think a lot of leaders struggle with that. So I want to share a quote in my language. I'm Shona, and it says, "Akuru manzewe ndewako." It means that if someone comes and tells you something, gives you feedback, that person loves you. So you ought to embrace them. And this is part of the art of embracing the human library. Of course, our results will speak for themselves. I think people were also talking about, you need to monitor the results. How do we know we are achieving it? But I think as we monitor these results, as we get the results, and we humble ourselves to really learn and build our skills from the human library, we can but win. And I've taken this quote from Mark Twain, where he talks about the fact that in 20 years from now, we are most likely going to regret the things we did not do than the things that we did do. So one of the pledges I'm making in front of you is to say, as we now have this IDG framework, can I pick two? And I'm also going to be leveraging the human library, right? And it doesn't matter if it's someone who reports to me, if it's someone that is 2 or 3 layers in my structure, it doesn't really matter. Talent, as we heard, is abundant. It's just opportunities that are limited. So I also want to challenge you with the same, to say as you go out, what are those leadership skills you're going to be building? And in fact, every situation that is difficult is calling for a new skill set. Maybe if we look at, situations of conflict, situations of difficulty, this hyperturbulence, and we say to ourselves, what skill set is this scenario calling for from me right now? Then I think we'll win. Thank you very much.
TM Global Media, going beyond borders.